Hey everyone, and welcome back to my Legion class review series where I level every class in the game up to 110, I play every spec, I get them geared up, and then I share my thoughts with you. Today, we are finally transitioning away from melee over to the casters, with our first one being the Mage. Pretty much the quintessential RPG archetype, or at least one of them, and generally speaking, a class in World of Warcraft that I've always thought has had some great ideas behind it. There's also no better time to check it out because patch 7.3 brought a whole revamp of their animations and their sound effects, which gives us a mage, that plays the same, but it feels a hell of a lot more destructive. Alright, let's kick it off with Frost. As a Frost Mage, you will be all about shattering the target with an array of procs and effects that all really intertwine with each other, leading to a super reactive playstyle that's got great movement, a whole bunch of instant casts, and some really satisfying high points in the gameplay. So, let's check out that gameplay. Okay, it's time for the Frost Mage gameplay explainer. Now this is a bit of a funny one because on the face of it, Frost seems super simple, but actually there's a decent amount of nuance in how it operates. Like with Fire, it does operate based on procs, and there's two that you need to worry about. The first one is Fingers of Frost. So using Frostbolt and Frozen Orb, it's got a 12% chance to grant a charge of Fingers of Frost. Now, Fingers of Frost causes your next Ice Lance to deal damage as if the target was frozen. If you look at the Ice Lance tooltip, you can see that, it's an instant, doesn't really do a massive amount of damage, but it does triple damage against frozen targets. So that's like, say, if I Frost Nova'd somebody. So, if one of these is procced, if you have a charge of Fingers of Frost and you use one of these, then it will be doing that triple damage, even if the target, literally speaking, is not frozen. So that's a very important interaction here, and I'll just sort of do this until we get a Fingers of Frost. I just got a Flurry, which is really not that useful for what I want to explain right now, unfortunately. Maybe we'll get a Fingers of Frost here at some point. Well, we're still going. There we go, finally a Fingers of Frost. So, if you look at this, you can see, bam, it does a hell of a lot of damage. So, that's one core thing. The other thing is Flurry. I've currently got one procced right now. You can see I fire that away, and then I threw an Ice Lance in. Why did I do that? I'll explain that right now. So, let's look at Brain Freeze. Frostbolt has a 23% chance to empower your next Flurry to be instant, deal more damage, and apply Winter's Chill to the target. Winter's Chill causes the target to take damage from your spells as if it was frozen. So, what does this mean? Well, if I use a procced Flurry, then my target will be affected by Brain Freeze, which means that my Ice Lance will see, oh, that target's frozen, I'm going to do triple damage. Now, if I, as an example, have a Fingers of Frost buffed up Ice Lance that's already going to be doing damage as if the target was frozen, then as you can imagine, it would be pointless to combine the two. So, often what you end up doing is you burn through your Fingers of Frost charges and fire off your Flurry, and then follow it up with an Ice Lance. And the way that Blizzard have balanced, I'm actually just going to use Ebonbolt here, which will guarantee me one of those flurries. If you look at how Flurry works, so you see the way these debuffs are going in terms of how it's refreshing as the different sort of, particles of Flurry hit the target. It means that you can pretty much get an Ice Lance snuck in there. And actually Flurry travels so fast that let's just imagine I had a charge of Flurry right now. I could cast a Frostbolt, and at the very end of the Frostbolt, I could hit that instant Flurry, which would mean that I would get a flurried Frostbolt. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically, it's got something to do with Shatter. So, Shatter multiplies the critical strike chance of your spells against frozen targets by 1.5 and adds an additional 50% crit chance. So, as you can imagine, if, say anything basically hits a target, and the target is behaving as if it's frozen, and then you get a big shatter, that can be a hell of a lot of damage. One thing that is particularly fun is those rare scenarios where your procced or your brain frozen flurry lines up with a glacial spike, and it does a tremendous amount of damage. Now, generally, you don't want to be doing too much delaying of flurries. Like what I'm doing right now is terrible because any of those frostbolts could have generated another flurry, but I just want to demonstrate this for you, where I'm going to go cast the Glacial Spike, then instantly follow it up with Flurry. You can see my Flurries hit the target before the Glacial Spike, which meant that the Glacial Spike benefited from the fact that it was hitting a brain-frozen target. Oh wow, man, there you go. That really is the core of how this plays. It's actually, in my opinion, just so cool how Blizzard have managed to get so much gameplay out of just a few buttons. I think that is a really cool thing indeed. So there you go, a quick look at the gameplay of the Frost Mage. Okay, so now that you understand the basics of Frost, what do I think about it? In short, I really enjoy Frost. While it is fair to say that it can get a little bit dull if you're just going Frostbolt, Frostbolt, Frostbolt forever, and you get bad RNG, that isn't the case most of the time. And when it's good, this spec feels really dynamic and engaging to play. Now those sound like buzzwords, but I think they're really applicable here. Having two procs with Flurry and Ice Lance means that you will have to react to them differently depending on the combination of them that is up. This is mainly down to how the effects of Flurry work and how its debuff on the target is. So it's not really good to, say, use a Finger of Frosted Ice Lance and have that go right after your Flurry, as you're not really getting the benefit from the Flurry debuff. So, you know, you should like Ice Lance away all of your fingers, stacks, then do a Flurry, then a regular Ice Lance. You'll do a bunch of damage, and it's just a really satisfying mix of abilities. And the fact that they play out in slightly different orders and they got to get you know, to play around them, it keeps you thinking, and that's great. What's even better is Incanter's Flow, the talent. This actually rewards you for pulling up your Fingers of Frost charges so you can blow them at high stacks of Incanter's Flow, which is again really satisfying and a good like skill cap differentiator. And another brilliant element is those times, those glorious times, when Flurry lines up with Glacial Spike, if talented, such that you have a guaranteed crit on your Glacial Spike, and it's just absolutely glorious. The way that travel times of Flurry work mean that you can do a cast like, say, a Frostbolt, then a Flurry, and the Flurry will land before the Frostbolt, meaning that if that Frostbolt crits, it will benefit from Shatter, which is, again, really satisfying. And then the target, of course, will be, you know, Brain Freeze will be a thing, so you can throw an Ice Lance in afterwards and that'll hit. And it's just really damn satisfying as a mechanic. Then AoE feels super aggressive. I really love like cooldown reduction mechanics in the game, so pulling the Frozen Orb CD down with the instant cast Blizzards and just seeing that number plummet is really fun. And then the utility's really strong, and you just overall feel so capable, especially because you've got all those movement abilities, or not abilities, like you've got all that movement because so much of your stuff is instant cast. Like, so in my book, Frost is just tremendous. I really have enjoyed playing it a hell of a lot. And next we move on to Fire. Fire is all about chaining procs together to unleash massive amounts of damage through its very unique feeling hot streak mechanic that's really been a defining part of Fire Mage gameplay for years. Their strong direct damage as well as their powerful rolling damage over time through Ignite just makes them a really powerful, robust and fun DPS spec. So let's go check out how they play. Okay, time for the gameplay section for the Fire Mage. Now, of course, these gameplay sections, they really just exist to get everyone up to speed with the very basics of how something plays. They're not a guide. If you want a guide, you can check out Icy Veins or Class Discord or something like that. Now, the Fire Mage is interesting in that it's pretty much all based, at least a lot of your gameplay feels like it's based off the hot streak mechanic. Basically, getting 2 direct damage critical strikes in a row will make your next Pyroblast or Flame Strike, Pyroblast being your big single target nuke, Flame Strike being a big AoE, nuke, it will make your next one instant cast and deal double the normal ignite damage. You're probably thinking, what's an ignite? Simple, it's your mastery. Your target will burn for an amount of damage over the next 9 seconds, and that's based off the total direct damage of the spells that you've pretty much just been using on your target. So a lot of how this class plays is building up really big ignites. Of course, your ignites can spread to other enemies, so it's great for AoE, and yeah, that's really the core of how it sort of plays out. But let's take a look at the actual spells themselves. So Fireball, you throw a fiery ball, it's got just your normal character's crit chance, so you know, you're going to be doing a lot of fireballs hoping for crits. Now, this is slightly changed by something here in that I am currently talented into Firestarter, which causes Fireball and Pyroblast to always crit when a target is above 90% health. Of course, if we look at this, this is above 90% health because it's a training dummy. I actually think this one can be damaged somewhat, which you know, does help me out a bit. But yeah, it's just important you know that the amount of procs that I'll be getting in this video, that's not indicative of normally playing this. So yeah, it's good that you know that. But anyway, the basic abilities. We're going to go do a fireball, and of course, because of what I just mentioned, this will crit, which means I can fire off a fire blast, which of course will crit because of what I mentioned. And yeah, we're getting, as you can see, loads and loads of pyroblasts. Now, I want to talk about Fire Blast because Fire Blast is awesome. So this is an instant. It's got 3 charges due to my talents. It's instant, but it's a guaranteed crit no matter what, which means that it, no matter what, will go and feed into the hot streak mechanic. What's even more cool is, now you'll just see, there, so right now I'm heating up, and you'll see that midway through this cast, I can actually fire off a Fire Blast. Which is really cool. It's off the global cooldown, doesn't interrupt your spell casting. So a lot of what happens in this is you're fishing for your initial proc, which is this. No, didn't get it. Well, let's go again. There we go, which is called heating up. And once you are heating up, you kind of secure it and turn it into a hot streak by using Fire Blast. And boom. What this leads to is just very aggressive and fun gameplay. Now, of course, we've got Phoenix Flames, which is our artifact ability. This is another guaranteed critical strike, so it does play into these abilities as well, but its characteristics in AoE mean that it can be a tremendous burst AoE tool. And then finally, we have Combustion. Now, I'm going to use Combustion here, but, you know, one of the things that it does is it massively increases your crit chance. That's not going to be as apparent here because I've got the Firestarter talent, and I'm, fighting against the training dummy here. Though that said, the training dummy is actually at 80, sub 90% health, so, yeah, that will actually work out for us. But anyway, there you go. I think that is the very core of what you need to understand the, very cool indeed, Fire Mage. Alright, as you probably noticed in the gameplay section, this is one for the people like with fast fingers. Fire blasting correctly to get all your hot streaks, it almost adds this like action element to the gameplay, demanding a good quick reaction from you. Keeps you awake and on your toes. And really that's one of the defining parts of how Fire feels to play. Just the idea of, seeing heating up and then just smashing that Fire Blast button to get your instant pyro. It's an endlessly satisfying interaction with brilliant sound effects and all that jazz, so I can see why Blizzard basically built the entire spec around that. The management of this mechanic and the idea of fishing for procs and all of that stuff means that you're constantly mentally engaged with what's going on. There's no room for going on autopilot here, and generally the gameplay feels really aggressive. As in, the proc, of heating up presents you with an opportunity, and it's up, to you to exploit it with Fire Blast. Now, there's subtleties into how this plays that are also quite interesting, especially when you start to, try to execute the perfect conflagration. And then a nice bit of tuning under the hood means that if 2 abilities hit at the same time, but only one of them crits, I believe it's a 0.2 second window, it doesn't cancel the hot streak. So it's this really smooth, pretty flawless feeling gameplay, and it's just really tightly tuned, I suppose. Then you've got Phoenix Flame. It's a solid addition. Its guaranteed crits mean that it's a really engaging part of the hot streak mechanic, and then its strong AoE burst is a really, potentially super powerful part of your toolkit depending on the fight. It's also easy to pick up and play, but it's got a fair bit of meat under the hood, and it's got a gameplay loop that, the gameplay loop is simple, but because they're doing a lot with a small number of mechanics, it just feels fast, aggressive, and in some ways endlessly engaging. So I love Fire. And next up, we've got Arcane. Arcane really is one of the more unique specs in the game. It's all about mana management and the idea of having a tremendously powerful burn phase where you're just dishing out damage, followed by a considered sort of conservation phase for your mana. So it's got this two-tone gameplay that's really the defining element of how it plays. So with that said, let's go check it out. Okay, it's time for the gameplay brief for the Arcane Mage, and this certainly is a very different feeling spec to play. The easiest way to explain it is really just to go through the ability, so let's start off with Arcane Blast. This blasts the target with energy, dealing 295,000 arcane damage. That damage is increased by 76% per arcane charge, but its mana cost is increased by 125% per arcane charge, and this ability will generate 1 arcane charge. So you can see, if I target this guy, and you'll see my arcane charges building up here, and you can see my mana costs are growing significantly. Of course, the damage is increasing by 76, but the mana cost is increasing by 125%, so it rapidly gets unsustainable. So there's one thing. Now, as I've been doing this, I've been generating charges of arcane missiles. Now, its damage is increased by 88% per arcane charge that you have. It does a whole bunch of damage, and you can pull up to 3 charges. Of course, it's actually free. It doesn't cost any mana. So to give you an example, right now I'm at 4 arcane charges. I'm going to burn off my arcane missiles, as you can see now, and then going to fire off my barrage to reset the number of charges that I've got. I'm going to keep on getting my way up to 4 arcane charges. Then we're going to burn off a whole bunch of arcane missiles. I can probably stay here for maybe 1 or 2 more, whatever. There we go. We got another missiles. And now, okay, I want to get some mana back, so we do this. That's the very core of the loop, but it really does play very differently because of evocation. So evocation returns 100% of your total mana over 5.3 seconds with a 1.5 minute cooldown. And this is where we get introduced to the concept of having burn and conserve phases. What you want to do is run out of mana as soon as evocation comes off cooldown. Now what that means is you want to be burning really hard. There's times when, as an example, say you've got a Rune of Power up, you've used your artifact ability, and you're just pumping out the arcane blasts at maximum charges. You're really burning through your mana, doing a whole bunch of damage, and then, so that's called the burn phase, and then you go into the conserve phase. And what's nice about how this plays is that arcane power has a 1.5 minute cooldown, and evocation also has a 1.5 minute cooldown, and that pretty much always slots in quite nicely with, say, Rune of Power cooldowns. All of this means is that you go through cycles of the burn phase when you're going really hard with your arcane blasts, you're really spending a lot of mana to do a lot of damage, of course with the knowledge that evocation's just about to come off, or that you can you'll be able to get that mana back with evocation. So it's a really interesting spec, and then your damage output is, you've just got so much freedom with it, and it's up to you how you actually manage that. So, of course, for most of the time, that does just end up burn phases and conserve phases, but there can be some sort of situational times where you just need to go extra hard for like another 10 seconds or whatever, to fit the situation that you're in. It's a very different playstyle to most of the other specs in the game, a very unique one, and certainly it's actually one that I've really, really been enjoying playing. It's got this like kind of fun sort of cerebral sort of thing where you're it's just satisfying to manage, really manage your character that deeply. But there you go, that is basically how Arcane plays, but a very simplified version. Now, the first thing that struck me, and I don't know if my memory's failing me here or if it's just like different at high item levels, but my mana management feels way different from how I remembered it being back at the start of this expansion or when I was on the alpha and beta. When I was initially getting into it on live, I was playing way too conservatively. I was often realizing evocation was a few seconds off cooldown, and I was at 50% mana, which was a bit of a problem. So after getting myself used to the timings, I finally started to fall into the rhythm of the burn and conserve phases, and it's a really unique feeling concept with how this plays. Often classes want to control how you play so that you can't mess up too much. That's not the case with Arcane. You can really, you just have so much freedom over how you use your resources here. And this naturally, of course, means that there's lots of fun little optimizations and tricks that you can pull off during gameplay, which results in you feeling very connected to your actions in the game, and that's very engaging. It's like, you're really actively managing your mana, which results in you having a lot of ownership over your successes and your failures. I ultimately think that this is a really good thing, and it means that playing it well, both in general cases, but then in situational cases where that freedom can be really useful, is just a very satisfying thing. The way that the various cooldowns line up as well, with like evocation and, your main DPS cooldowns, creates a very solid sort of, minute and a half long sort of gameplay loop where you're always either executing something awesome or planning towards how you can best execute something that's awesome. This means that all of your gameplay is considered and planned, and even when you're in what should be the filler phase, it doesn't feel like filler. Then there's all the little optimizations like carrying your arcane missiles charges through evocation so that you have it on cooldown as fast as you can, and then just doing a whole, unleashing a bunch of damage afterwards. Generally just managing arcane missiles charges at the end of a burn phase so that you perfectly hit evocation right as it comes off cooldown just feels really damn satisfying, and it's a great part of an overall gameplay loop that's just really fun. And then of course its AoE is also super enjoyable. So Arcane's maybe a bit below the other two for me, but it's still a very, very fun spec in the grand scheme of things. And now that I've talked about the specs, I just want to talk about the Mage in general for a little bit. Being a Mage is really damn cool. So you've got your ice block, you've got a form of barrier, you've got access to loads of control options, and that just means that it's a lot of fun to play around with, and it results in you there's these times where, like, you know, you're scrapping your way through a situation, you're almost dead, but, you know, you use all your charges of your Frost Nova and you leap about the place and you kind of make it through, and that's just really satisfying. Now, movement-wise, you know, they're bad on the 10k run, but they're damn good at the sprint, especially when it comes, you know, with something like Shimmer, which is just a great piece of kit. It operates in the same way as Blink, just that it's off the GCD, and it can be done mid-cast. Now, sure, it's not as fast as, say, a Monk over a period of time, but it gets you to where you need to be without disrupting your damage dealing, which is really cool and really satisfying to use. Just in general, being a mage, I think, is quite a fun experience. Now that said, when you are at low gear, world content and leveling can be a bit of a pain in the ass, but once you get the gear, it is very fun indeed. So to conclude, like, damn, what a class. Every one of these specs is one that I really enjoy. They've all got a unique flavor to them, a unique gameplay hook, and each one of those unique things is something that I really, really like. It's one of those times where if I had to play the highest DPS mage spec, I would be happy regardless of which one was on top. Now that said, am I going to play a mage as my main? No. Why? It's really simple. I want a multi-role. I like being able to tank, and I can't do that if I'm maining a mage. Now, of course, as you know, I've been maining a monk, but here's what I can say. Of all of my alts, the mage is definitely going to be one of my more played ones, because it is, as a pure DPS spec, one of the most fun ones that I've really done to date. So, honestly, you know, my last video on the Paladin was pretty negative. This has really sort of counteracted that. One of my favorite classes, absolutely fantastic, and I can totally see why, if you are a DPS focused player, this would be a great class to main. So that is it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you want to check out more of the channel, hit that subscribe button. If you're interested in supporting what we do, you can check out the Patreon. But with that, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.